It was 4:30 a.m. when the cargo ship Mariana approached Dock 47 at Miami Port. Captain Marcus Delaney stood on the bridge watching dock workers prepare to unload containers. The hold contained medical equipment from Venezuela worth $2.3 million. At least that's what the manifest showed. In reality, there were 500 kilograms of cocaine worth $20 million, hidden in specially modified containers with false bottoms and lead-lined compartments designed to fool X-ray scanners. But when customs officers opened the containers 6 hours later, they found only empty medical supply boxes and sandbags weighing exactly the same as the missing narcotics. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Marcus Delaney had worked as a cargo ship captain for 15 years. After completing his service in the United States Navy, where he specialized in logistics and international maritime law, he joined the private shipping company, Atlantic Shipping Corporation, based out of Fort Lauderdale. The salary was decent for the maritime industry, $8,000 per month, plus bonuses for successful deliveries and clean safety records. But it wasn't nearly enough to cover his mounting expenses. Delaney's wife, Sarah, suffered from a rare and aggressive form of acute lymphoblastic leukemia that required experimental treatment protocols not covered by standard insurance policies. The specialized chemotherapy drugs cost $15,000 monthly, and that didn't include the additional costs for hospital stays, blood transfusions, specialist consultations, and the weekly trips to Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore, where the only qualified oncologist who understood her specific genetic markers practiced. Insurance covered only 30% of the total treatment costs. Over 2 years of fighting the disease, Marcus had accumulated $180,000 in medical debt. The bank threatened to foreclose on their house in Coral Gables. Credit card companies called twice daily. Medical collection agencies sent threatening letters weekly. Marcus had tried everything legitimate to raise money. He worked overtime shifts, took on additional cargo runs during his supposed vacation time, sold his boat and his vintage motorcycle, borrowed against his 401k retirement fund, and even considered taking out a reverse mortgage on the house. Nothing generated enough cash flow to keep up with Sarah's treatment schedule. On Tuesday, March 12th, Marcus received an unexpected call from Victor Morales, a former Navy buddy he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. They had served together on the USS Constellation during peacekeeping missions in the Mediterranean. Victor now worked in what he vaguely described as import-export logistics for various South American business interests. He suggested they meet that evening at Neptune's Anchor, a dimly lit maritime bar popular with merchant sailors and port workers located 2 blocks from the Miami shipping district. "Listen, Mac, I heard through mutual friends about Sarah's situation," Victor said, ordering his second Corona and speaking in low tones despite the loud classic rock music playing overhead. "I might have a business proposition that could solve your financial problems permanently. 1 trip, $500,000 cash. All you need to do is deliver some medical equipment from Caracas to Miami. Completely routine cargo run, except the client values discretion and is willing to pay premium rates for guaranteed delivery and absolute confidentiality." Marcus knew immediately that Victor wasn't talking about legitimate medical equipment. In 15 years of maritime cargo transport, he had never seen anyone pay $500,000 for a routine delivery between Venezuela and Florida. The usual rate for that route was maybe $20,000 maximum, but $500,000 would completely eliminate his debts, pay for Sarah's treatment for the next 2 years, and leave enough left over to finally afford the experimental gene therapy that her oncologist had mentioned might cure her permanently. "What kind of guarantees are we talking about?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady while his mind raced through the implications and potential consequences. "Money up front, half deposited in your account tomorrow morning, half within 24 hours of successful delivery. The client has already verified your shipping credentials, your clean record with customs, and your reputation for reliable cargo handling. Plus, you have a trustworthy crew, right? People who can follow orders and keep their mouths shut about routine business operations." Marcus thought carefully about his regular crew members. Elena Ramirez had worked as his first mate for 3 years and was one of the most competent maritime officers he had ever worked with. She had graduated top of her class from the Maritime Academy, spoke 4 languages fluently, and could navigate by stars if the GPS systems failed. But Elena also had significant financial pressures. She was paying off $80,000 in student loans for her marine engineering degree and supporting her daughter's private school education and college savings fund. Joe Simmons handled cargo logistics and had 8 years of experience managing complex international shipping manifests. Joe understood customs procedures, import-export documentation, and how to expedite cargo through bureaucratic channels. But Joe also had a serious gambling problem and had recently lost $40,000 to some very unforgiving bookmakers who were making increasingly aggressive collection efforts. "Yeah, reliable crew," Marcus answered, already knowing that both Elena and Joe would be desperate enough to go along with whatever Victor was proposing. The next morning at 9:15 a.m., Marcus checked his bank account and found $250,000 had been deposited overnight by wire transfer from a Cayman Islands financial institution listed as Meridian Medical Supply International. Within 2 hours, he had paid off the most pressing creditors, settled 3 months of mortgage payments in advance, and purchased a 6-month supply of Sarah's medications from the hospital pharmacy. For the first time in 2 years, he felt like he could breathe normally without constant panic about mounting bills and collection agencies. On Thursday morning, the Mariana crew received official sailing orders to depart for La Guaira, the main port serving Caracas, Venezuela. The ship's manifest listed their cargo as various medical supplies and diagnostic equipment destined for Miami General Hospital. According to the paperwork, the total cargo value was $2.3 million and was fully insured through Lloyd's of London Maritime Insurance. Everything appeared completely legitimate and routine to anyone reviewing the official documentation. Friday evening, just before sunset, Marcus gathered Elena and Joe in his private cabin for what he described as a crew briefing about special cargo procedures for this particular client. The cabin was small but comfortable, with nautical charts covering one wall and family photos of Sarah and their daughter displayed on his desk. "This voyage is different from our usual runs," he explained, closing the cabin door and speaking in carefully measured tones. "There will be some additional containers that won't appear on the official manifest. These containers contain sensitive medical equipment that requires special handling procedures and complete confidentiality due to patent protection issues and international regulatory complications. In recognition of the additional responsibilities and the need for absolute discretion, each crew member will receive a bonus payment of $50,000 upon successful completion of this delivery." Elena immediately looked suspicious and asked the obvious question that Marcus had been dreading. "Captain, what exactly is in these unofficial containers? I need to know what we're transporting to ensure proper safety protocols and legal compliance with international maritime law." "The less you know about the specific contents, the better for everyone involved," Marcus replied, trying to project confidence while internally struggling with the moral implications of what he was asking his loyal crew to do. "I'm taking full legal responsibility for the entire cargo manifest. Your only job is to follow my orders and maintain normal operational procedures. Think of the bonus money as hazard pay for handling sensitive equipment that requires discretional handling." Joe nodded immediately without asking further questions. His gambling debts had reached the point where bookmakers were threatening physical violence if he didn't pay within 2 weeks. $50,000? Hell yes, I'm absolutely in. I need that money more than I need my next breath. Elena hesitated for several long moments, clearly weighing the potential legal and professional risks against her desperate financial needs. Her daughter's private school tuition was due next month, and her student loan payments were already 3 months behind. Finally, she agreed, but with obvious reluctance. "All right, Captain, but if anything goes wrong, if Customs asks detailed questions, if we get boarded by Coast Guard during transit, I need to know exactly what story we're telling and what our legal position will be. We're transporting medical equipment for Miami General Hospital according to all official documentation. That's the complete truth according to our manifest and insurance papers. Anything beyond that is need-to-know information, and right now, you don't need to know specifics." Saturday morning at 6 a.m. sharp, Mariana left Miami port heading southeast toward Venezuelan territorial waters. The journey typically took 4 days of steady sailing through relatively calm Caribbean waters, depending on weather conditions and current patterns. The crew maintained normal watch schedules and routine maintenance procedures throughout the first day. Marcus deliberately kept conversation light and avoided any mention of their actual mission or the unofficial cargo they would be picking up in Caracas. Elena handled navigation duties with her usual professional competence, plotting courses and monitoring weather reports. Joe managed the engine room operations and cargo monitoring systems with his typical attention to detail. The ship's other crew members, Rodriguez the bosun, Martinez the cook, and two junior sailors remained completely unaware of any special aspects of this particular voyage. The first 3 days passed without any significant incidents or complications. Wednesday morning, the ship entered La Guaira port near Caracas, under overcast skies and light rain. Victor's contact team was waiting at the designated dock area. They appeared to be legitimate Venezuelan port workers and customs officials, complete with proper identification badges and official paperwork. The loading process began immediately with 5 standard shipping containers containing actual medical equipment, X-ray machines, ultrasound devices, hospital beds, surgical instruments, and pharmaceutical supplies. Everything was properly documented, inspected by Venezuelan customs authorities according to standard protocols, and loaded according to international shipping regulations. Then, after sunset, when most of the regular port workers had gone home and dock security presence was minimal, a different team arrived with 2 additional containers. These containers bore no official markings, carried no customs documentation, and were transported by people who obviously preferred to work in darkness without attracting attention from port authorities or security cameras positioned around the loading areas. Marcus personally inspected the unofficial containers before they were secured in the ship's hold. Each container was approximately 20 feet long and appeared to weigh several tons based on how the private crane struggled to position them properly in the cargo space. The containers were sealed with military-grade locks and had been welded shut along all seams to prevent tampering or accidental opening during transport. According to the brief technical specifications provided by Victor's Venezuelan contact, the containers contained specially constructed reinforced metal boxes with double-wall construction designed to fool standard inspection equipment. The cocaine was vacuum-sealed in waterproof packages and hidden between the inner and outer walls of these boxes, making it completely invisible to X-ray scanners, metal detectors, and drug-sniffing dogs used by customs agencies. "Are customs officials in Miami aware of our scheduled arrival?" Marcus asked the Venezuelan contact, a thin man in his 50s, who spoke English with a slight accent and seemed very familiar with international shipping procedures and documentation requirements. "Everything has been arranged exactly according to your friend Victor's detailed specifications. Your ship will undergo only routine inspection procedures, nothing more intensive than normal cargo verification. The additional cargo is completely undetectable using standard customs scanning equipment and trained dogs. Just maintain your planned route and arrival schedule. Do not deviate from the approved shipping lanes. Do not make any unscheduled stops or communications, and do not allow anyone else to inspect the cargo hold under any circumstances." Thursday morning, Mariana departed Venezuelan waters and began the return journey to Miami. The planned route took them through international waters for most of the trip, staying well clear of Coast Guard patrol areas and known drug interdiction zones where military vessels conducted random searches of suspicious cargo ships. Weather conditions were favorable with calm seas and clear skies predicted for the entire 3-day journey back to Florida. But Friday morning, Marcus began noticing unusual and suspicious behavior from his crew members. Elena and Joe were having whispered conversations near the radio communication equipment. When he approached them, they would suddenly stop talking and pretend to be discussing routine navigational issues or maintenance schedules. Elena had been making frequent calls on the ship's satellite phone system, something she normally did only for genuine emergencies or essential business communications with port authorities. Joe had been spending excessive time in the cargo hold area, supposedly checking on routine equipment monitoring and temperature controls, but staying down there much longer than necessary for standard inspection procedures. Both crew members seemed nervous and kept checking their watches as if they were waiting for something specific to happen at a predetermined time. That afternoon, Marcus found a handwritten note slipped under his cabin door. "Captain, they are planning to betray you. The crew has made contact with outside parties who want to steal the cargo. Be very careful who you trust. Someone is watching out for you." The note was written in block letters that didn't match the handwriting of anyone on his crew, but someone had obviously placed it there while he was on the bridge during the afternoon watch rotation. Marcus didn't know who had written the warning note, but he began discreetly monitoring Elena and Joe's activities over the next 24 hours. He observed Elena making multiple satellite phone calls at times when she thought he was sleeping or occupied with other bridge duties. Joe made several unnecessary trips to the cargo hold and spent time examining the additional containers much more closely than required for routine cargo monitoring procedures. Both crew members seemed increasingly nervous and kept checking their watches as if waiting for something specific to happen. Marcus began to suspect that his trusted crew had been compromised by outside parties who knew about the cocaine shipment and planned to steal it during the voyage. Saturday evening, approximately 18 hours before their scheduled arrival in Miami, Marcus was awakened around 2 a.m. by unusual mechanical sounds coming from the ship's deck area. These weren't the normal sounds of wind, waves, or routine ship operations that he had grown accustomed to over 15 years of maritime service. Someone was operating heavy equipment on deck, and there were voices coordinating some kind of complex operation. He looked through his cabin porthole and was shocked to see a sleek speedboat positioned alongside Mariana in the darkness. Several people wearing dark clothing and professional diving gear were using some kind of sophisticated pulley system to transfer heavy cargo from the ship's hold to their boat. The operation was being conducted with military precision and obviously had been planned weeks in advance. Marcus quietly made his way down to the cargo hold, moving carefully through the ship's corridors to avoid being detected by whoever was conducting the transfer operation. The hold was open and brightly lit by portable floodlights. The two unofficial containers had completely disappeared. In their place were wooden boxes filled with sand that appeared to weigh approximately the same as the missing containers, presumably to maintain the ship's proper weight distribution and avoid detection by anyone checking cargo manifests or conducting routine inspections. As he watched from the shadows behind legitimate cargo containers, he heard familiar voices coordinating the loading process. Elena was directing the mechanical aspects of the transfer operation, while Joe handled the electronic equipment and communications with the speedboat crew. They were obviously in charge of the entire theft and had been planning this betrayal for days or possibly weeks before the voyage began. Marcus heard footsteps approaching from behind and turned to find Elena pointing a 9mm pistol directly at his chest. "I'm really sorry about this situation, Mac," she said, her voice carrying genuine regret but also firm resolve. "We didn't want to involve you directly in what's happening, but you've seen too much now and we can't let you interfere. We received a much better financial offer from people who significantly outbid your original client's organization." Joe emerged from behind a stack of legitimate cargo containers, also carrying a firearm and looking nervous but determined. "The Colombians offered us $40 million instead of the $20 million your guy Victor was planning to pay his people for this shipment. We couldn't refuse that kind of money, especially considering our personal financial situations. Elena's daughter needs expensive surgery, and I owe money to some very dangerous people who will literally kill me if I don't pay them back within the next 2 weeks." "Who exactly are these Colombians you're working with?" Marcus asked, trying to remain calm while calculating his limited options for getting out of this situation alive. "Cartel de Norte. They have extensive intelligence networks throughout the Caribbean drug trade and sophisticated connections in ports from Venezuela to Miami. They learned about Victor's cocaine operation weeks ago and approached us with a counteroffer that we simply couldn't refuse. Your friend Victor works for a relatively small trafficking organization with limited resources. These Colombians represent a major international cartel with financial resources and political connections that Victor's people can't possibly match." Marcus realized what had happened. Elena and Joe had been secretly recruited by a competing drug cartel to hijack the cocaine shipment during transit through international waters. They had arranged to transfer the drugs to the Colombian speedboat in the middle of the ocean where there was no risk of Coast Guard interference or detection by law enforcement agencies. "What happens to me in this scenario?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would not be favorable. "You become the scapegoat for the entire operation," Joe explained matter-of-factly, as if discussing routine business procedures. "When we arrive in Miami tomorrow morning and customs officials discover the missing cocaine during their inspection, you'll be immediately arrested for international drug smuggling and conspiracy charges. Elena and I will testify that you organized the entire criminal operation without our knowledge and that we only discovered the drugs were missing after we arrived in port. We'll cooperate fully with federal investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution and witness protection." Elena kept her weapon trained on Marcus while speaking in apologetic tones. "We're not going to hurt you physically, but we absolutely cannot let you interfere with the transfer operation that's currently in progress. Nothing personal, Mac. This is purely a business decision based on financial necessity and survival instincts." But Marcus had not survived 20 years in the United States Navy, and 15 years of dangerous international shipping operations by giving up when confronted with seemingly impossible situations. He also knew from his military experience that Colombian drug cartels would not leave any witnesses alive who could potentially identify them or testify about their operations in court. Elena and Joe were essentially dead already. They just didn't understand that reality yet. "All right, I understand your position and the financial pressures you're both facing," he said, projecting calm acceptance, while his mind worked frantically on a survival strategy. "But when customs agents discover empty containers in Miami tomorrow, they're going to conduct a very thorough federal investigation with unlimited resources. What exactly are you planning to tell FBI investigators about how 500 kilograms of cocaine vanished from a sealed cargo hold during a routine voyage through international waters?" Joe smiled with what he obviously thought was clever confidence. "We'll explain that you must have hidden the cocaine somewhere else on the ship before we arrived in port, probably in a secret compartment we didn't know about. We'll say that we had absolutely no knowledge of any illegal cargo, and that you obviously used your position as captain to deceive your own crew members. We'll suggest that you probably have accomplices waiting in Miami to help you retrieve the hidden drugs after the ship passes customs inspection." "That's an interesting theory that might work," Marcus replied carefully. "But what about all the electronic documentation of your involvement in this conspiracy? I have detailed digital records of all your phone calls, text messages, GPS coordinates, and financial transactions related to this operation." Elena's confident expression immediately changed to concern and suspicion. "What records? What exactly are you talking about, Captain?" Marcus was improvising desperately, but he spoke with convincing authority based on his knowledge of modern ship security systems. The ship's advanced surveillance and security systems automatically record all satellite communications, precise GPS coordinates, radio transmissions, and electronic financial transactions conducted using the ship's communication equipment. I have comprehensive digital files documenting your secret conversations with the Colombian contacts, the exact coordinates where we met their speedboat tonight, and electronic records of the money transfers they made to your personal bank accounts to secure your cooperation." This was completely false. Mariana had no such sophisticated surveillance systems beyond basic navigation equipment. But Elena and Joe worked primarily with cargo handling and navigation equipment, not advanced communications technology, so they might not know the technical limitations of the ship's electronic recording capabilities. "Where are these supposed surveillance records stored?" Elena demanded, but Marcus could hear uncertainty and worry creeping into her voice. "They're stored in an encrypted digital safe system in my cabin, connected to satellite uplink systems. The security program is designed to automatically transmit all files to FBI headquarters if I don't enter my personal authorization code every 12 hours. If something happens to me, or if I'm prevented from accessing the system for any reason, those files will be sent directly to federal law enforcement agencies within 6 hours along with our current GPS position." This was also completely fabricated, but Marcus was buying time while trying to formulate a real plan for survival that didn't involve getting shot and thrown overboard. Joe was obviously becoming nervous about potential electronic evidence of their conspiracy. "We need to get access to those files and delete them completely before we finish the transfer operation and return to Miami. The files can only be accessed and deleted using my personal 12-digit authorization code," Marcus explained convincingly, "and I'll only provide that code in exchange for my freedom and a fair share of the Colombian money you received." Elena lowered her weapon slightly while considering this new complication that could potentially destroy their entire plan. "What exactly are you proposing as a solution?" "Simple business negotiation between professionals. We split the $40 million 3 ways equally. That's more than $13 million each, which is still significantly more than any of us would make in several years of legitimate shipping work, even with overtime and bonuses." "The Colombians already paid us the full amount in advance," Joe said, but his tone suggested he was genuinely worried about Marcus's supposed surveillance evidence that could send them to federal prison for life. "If you already have all the money safely deposited, then why are you so concerned about the electronic documentation I described?" Marcus asked logically. "Obviously you're worried that federal investigators will be able to trace the entire conspiracy back to you using digital evidence." Marcus could see that fear was beginning to override greed in their decision-making process. They realized that $40 million wouldn't be worth much if they ended up spending the rest of their lives in federal prison or got killed by Colombian enforcers who eliminated loose ends. Okay, we'll consider your proposal, Elena said after a long pause. But we need to see these surveillance files first, before we agree to anything or give you a share of the money. The three of them went up to Marcus's cabin, with Elena and Joe keeping their weapons ready, but pointed away from him. Marcus opened his personal safe and removed a USB flash drive. The drive actually contained family photos and personal documents, but in the dim cabin lighting and stress of the moment, Elena and Joe couldn't see the specific file names clearly. Here's everything the FBI would need, Marcus said, handing over the flash drive. Communications records, GPS tracking data, financial transaction logs, satellite phone recordings, everything federal investigators would need to reconstruct the entire conspiracy and identify everyone involved. Joe immediately inserted the drive into Marcus's laptop computer. The screen displayed a folder full of files with technical-sounding names that could plausibly be surveillance data. In the darkness and stress of the moment, neither Elena nor Joe looked closely enough to realize they were actually seeing photo files rather than the promised surveillance recordings. "This looks legitimate," Joe said, scrolling through the file directory without opening individual files to examine their actual contents. At that exact moment, Marcus pressed a concealed emergency alarm button located under his desk. A loud warning siren began blaring throughout the ship, indicating that the captain was in immediate danger. This was a standard safety protocol on all merchant vessels that would bring the entire crew running to investigate. Within 30 seconds, the other crew members came running toward the cabin to respond to the emergency signal. Elena and Joe couldn't risk shooting Marcus with witnesses present, and they couldn't explain why they were holding guns on their captain without revealing their involvement in the drug theft that was still in progress on deck. "Captain, is everything all right?" asked Rodriguez, the ship's bosun, as he burst through the cabin door followed by two other sailors who had heard the alarm. "False alarm," Marcus said calmly. "I accidentally triggered the emergency system while checking some electronic equipment. Everything's under control now." Elena and Joe realized they had lost their leverage over Marcus. The Colombian speedboat had already departed with the cocaine cargo, and now there were too many witnesses for them to take any action against their captain. Their entire carefully planned betrayal had collapsed because of Marcus's bluff about surveillance systems that didn't actually exist. Sunday morning at 6 a.m., Mariana arrived at Miami port and docked at the designated berth. Marcus immediately contacted Victor by satellite phone to report what had happened during the night. Victor arrived at the dock 45 minutes later with a team of 6 heavily armed men who looked like professional military contractors rather than typical port workers. Customs officials began their routine inspection procedures at 8 a.m. sharp. They examined the 5 legitimate containers containing medical equipment and found everything properly documented and exactly as described in the official shipping manifest. But when they opened the 2 additional containers that had been loaded in Venezuela, they discovered only wooden boxes filled with sand. Victor was absolutely furious when he learned that 500 kilograms of his organization's cocaine had vanished during the voyage. "Where the hell is my merchandise, Delaney? Do you have any idea how much money you've cost my organization and what the consequences will be?" "Ask them," Marcus replied, pointing toward Elena and Joe, who were standing nearby trying to look innocent and uninvolved. Within minutes of Victor's men converging on the dockside warehouse, the atmosphere exploded into chaos. Victor's muscle, half a dozen hulking ex-military operatives armed with AK-47s and sidearms, surrounded Elena and Joe, shouting rapid-fire questions and cuffing them at the wrists. "Where's our merchandise?" one bellowed, jabbing a finger into Joe's chest. "Tell us now before things get ugly." At that same moment, a convoy of glossy black SUVs roared up the adjacent pier. Doors flung open, and dark-clad enforcers from Cartel de Norte poured onto the dock, their own weapons drawn, Uzis, Tech-9s, and homemade shotgun rigs. These Colombians had arrived to extract Elena and Joe, cartel moles who had double-crossed them, and spirit them away to a safe house before local authorities could intervene. Their leader, a lean man known only as El Jaguar, barked orders in clipped Spanish. "Secure the prisoners, move them now." The 2 rival armed groups collided midway between the warehouse entrance and the gangway ramp. Victor's men formed a tight ring around Elena and Joe. The Colombians squeezed in from the other side. Nervous port workers and stevedores scattered for cover as the first shots rang out. A hail of steel shattered crates and sent splinters flying. Within seconds, gunfire echoed off the concrete silos and rippled across the placid water beyond. an unmistakable signal that the dock had become a battlefield. Port security guards, caught unprepared, slammed emergency lockdown protocols. Rolling barricades clanged into place at either end of the pier, fire hoses deployed as impromptu smoke screens, and PA announcements crackled out. All personnel stand by for Miami-Dade PD and SWAT response. Evacuate non-essential areas immediately. True to protocol, Miami-Dade's elite SWAT unit thundered onto the scene in armored Bearcats within 15 minutes. Their command vehicle rolled to a halt like a tank, and the team's leader, Lieutenant Angela Soto, barked into her radio. Perimeter secured, all units establish containment, weapons down, civilians clear. By the time officers fanned out behind riot shields, the two factions were locked in a tense standoff, separated by only a dozen yards. Soto's voice boomed over a megaphone. "This is the Miami-Dade SWAT. Drop your weapons immediately, or we will take them by force." For 30 heart-stopping seconds, both sides froze, guns raised. Then, one by one, Victor's men and the Colombians began to lower their weapons under the weight of SWAT's armored presence. In the resulting sweep, 8 suspects, 4 from Victor's crew and 4 cartel enforcers, were taken into custody at gunpoint. 3 wounded men were bundled onto stretchers. 1 Colombian thug with a graze wound to the thigh, 1 Victor lieutenant nursing a forearm injury, and Elena Ramirez, clutching her left shoulder where a .45 caliber round had torn through muscle and clothing. Paramedics rushed Elena into an ambulance parked just off the dock, her cries of pain muffled by the cacophony of sirens. A team of EMTs applied a pressure bandage and loaded her onto a gurney, all under the vigilant gaze of 2 uniformed officers who locked the ambulance doors behind them. She was whisked to Jackson Memorial Hospital's trauma unit under heavy guard, her life hanging in the balance as surgeons prepared to remove the bullet fragment lodged near her shoulder blade. Meanwhile, Joe Simmons attempted a desperate escape. He overbalanced a port crate and vaulted into the murky harbor, hoping to swim to a waiting speedboat draped in cartel livery. Under the glare of spotlights and the wail of police sirens, he struggled against the current, leaving a single trail of bubbles. 2 SWAT snipers aimed their rifles but held fire on Soto's order. Seconds later, Joe's desperate strokes faltered. As his head went under the water, he vanished beneath the oily surface, never to reemerge. Victor himself was handcuffed and read his rights after SMAT officers confiscated several illegal firearms and high-capacity magazines strapped to his belt. He spat curses in Spanish, but remained largely defiant, pressing his lips together as detectives photographed his tattoos and confiscated his weapons. Amid the chaos, Captain Marcus Delaney surfaced from the warehouse office, hands raised in surrender. He walked toward a cluster of FBI agents led by Special Agent Carla Reyes, whose team had shadowed the operation based on Marcus's earlier call for emergency procedures. Marcus steadied himself against a shipping crate and offered to speak. "I want to cooperate fully," he said. "I'll tell you everything." Over the next 6 grueling hours, Marcus sat in an improvised command post inside the dock's security building. Under alternating hot lights and the hum of police radios, he recounted every detail. Victor's $500,000 upfront payment, the clandestine loading in La Guaira, Elena and Joe's betrayal, and the midnight rendezvous with the cartel speedboat. His testimony was recorded on video, transcribed in real time by court stenographers, and immediately cross-checked against intercepted phone records and surveillance footage. Back on Mariana, federal agents deployed K9 teams, advanced ground-penetrating radar, and gamma-ray cargo scanners, scouring the hold from deck plates to ballast tanks. Each K9 whined and pawed at suspicious seams. Each scan revealed only the wooden crates filled with sand that Elena and Joe had left behind. The rifles and tear gas canisters recovered from the dock dwarfed any evidence of narcotics. Despite their best efforts, investigators never located a single gram of the 500 kilograms of cocaine. Cartel del Norte had vanished with the drugs, and within 72 hours the shipment had been cut, diluted with stimulants and innocuous fillers, and dispersed through the cartel's well-oiled network in Miami, Orlando, and Jacksonville. In federal court, Elena Ramirez was indicted on charges of international drug trafficking, conspiracy, and theft of controlled substances. She refused every offer of leniency, declining to divulge a single name or operational detail about Cartel del Norte's hierarchy or distribution channels. The jury, faced with her cold recalcitrance and the mountain of evidence from Marcus's testimony and SWAT reports, convicted her on all counts. In sentencing, the judge deemed her refusal to cooperate an aggravating factor and imposed a stiff 15-year federal prison term, no possibility of parole, ensuring she would remain behind bars well into middle age. Marcus Delaney, by contrast, saw his merchant marine captain's license revoked and his employment with Atlantic Shipping Corporation terminated immediately. However, the U.S. Attorney's Office granted him full immunity in exchange for his candid cooperation, concluding he had been an unwitting, or at most coerced, participant in the conspiracy. He faced no criminal charges and was released from custody that same afternoon. With the $250,000 Victor had wired before the voyage, Marcus and his wife Sarah relocated to Houston, Texas. There, he secured work as a maintenance supervisor on an offshore oil drilling platform in the Gulf of Mexico, a far cry from commanding a freighter on international waters, but steady, lawful, and vital for his family's future. Most critically, those funds paid for Sarah's experimental treatment at MD Anderson Cancer Center. Within 18 months, her cancer went into full remission, freeing them from the specter that had driven Marcus to desperation. Though Sarah and their young daughter returned to normal life, her days spent as a public school librarian, their child dreaming of marine biology, Marcus bore a secret. He never told Sarah the true origin of the funds that saved her life. She believed the money came from a small inheritance or a line of credit he secured against their home. Marcus carried the weight of that unspoken truth in quiet moments, lying awake at night, listening for sirens or distant helicopter blades, ever alert to both federal agents and cartel enforcers. 2 years after the Miami debacle, an unmarked envelope appeared in their Houston mailbox. Inside lay a photo of their suburban home and a single note. $20 million plus interest. We know where you live. No signature, no demands. Just a chilling reminder that Cartel del Norte remembered debts unpaid. Since then, Marcus has varied his routines, installed surveillance cameras, and kept a safe room fortified behind a reinforced door. Still, 3 years on, no one has come knocking. Elena Ramirez will be eligible for release in a dozen years if she maintains perfect conduct. She remains the sole living witness to the midnight transfer, and the only woman who knows exactly how Cartel del Norte orchestrated its biggest coup on American soil. The FBI officially closed the Mariana case as solved, though the missing cocaine and the $40 million it generated for the cartel remains a phantom. Marcus now greets every sunrise from an oil rig helideck, watching the distant horizon and recalling a time when he was a ship's captain making choices that shaped lives. He knows he did what he had to do to save Sarah, but he also knows some debts cannot be repaid. Every unexpected knock, every unfamiliar vehicle reminds him that the ocean's reach can be as long as a cartel's memory, and that some choices follow a man forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.